Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. The Muddy Waters Podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what is going on in our state because the mainstream media is not doing their job in educating the people. So that's why I created the Muddy Waters Podcast, is to be able to interview people from around the state to tell you real stories about what's really going on. Things that, again, if the mainstream media were doing their job, I would be able to work on other things. But unfortunately, they have decided to be ideologically captured and essentially to be a arm of the Democrat Party, a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. And so what we do is we bring people in who have stories to tell. And today we are fortunate to have a high school senior with us, and I'll get to that in just a second. But one of the interesting things, and it's going to relate to the conversation, so I just want to bring these things up before we jump into it, is that the Democrat Party has once again decided in Augusta to censure Laurel Libby because they ended the session to finalize the budget, the very partisan budget. Rumor has it there's going to attempt to be a people's veto for this budget, but they passed this budget, which ended the session, and then they came back into emergency session. So because it's a new session, they had to re-censure Laurel Libby so she can continue to not speak. And over the post that she made. And then we also have another story that the Maine Wire reported. They're keeping busy these days about a high school senior, a high school student in Bonnie Eagle who got accused of of raping a 15-year-old girl in a bathroom. And today, so those are some crazy things that are happening in our world. If you haven't seen those articles, go over to the Maine Wire. But today we have with us Cassidy Carlisle, and you may have seen Cassidy on some of the videos that I posted on X from the Girl First rally where she told her story. So thank you so much, number one, for coming on and being willing to speak out.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this podcast is basically a platform to be able to give anybody who's got something good to share with the people and let people know what's going on in our world. And given what I heard, from your story at the Capitol, I guess was it last weekend or the weekend before? I was just like, we need more people to know what's going on, what went on, and then where things are at now. So, yeah, I just want to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of tell people like who you are, where you're from. I know you're from Northern Maine, but I don't know exactly where. How I guess the stuff that kind of happened to you that put you in the position where you had to speak out.
Okay, so my name is Cassidy Carlisle. I'm currently a senior at Presque Isle High School in Presque Isle, Maine. I am a 3-sport varsity athlete. I compete in varsity soccer, varsity Nordic skiing, and varsity track and field. The reason that I started to speak out was because I competed against a trans athlete my junior year and senior year of high school in Nordic skiing. But my story actually starts when I was in 7th grade. When I was in 7th grade, I was going to change up for gym like I would any other day. And I walked in the locker room and there was a biological male. In that moment, I didn't know what to do, but I knew something wasn't right. I knew something was wrong and I knew that wasn't correct. But again, I was 13 years old and as a 13-year-old, I didn't know what to do. So at that point, I had gone to my school administration where I was told, you can change in the individual bathroom, but that you could be late. But at that, I don't ever blame my school administration. I ultimately blame the policy that they had to follow and the policy that's put in place right now. My administrators in my district are really great, and I feel very bad that they have to follow this policy, and it's a policy that they have to follow. And so, though that's a situation that I never want a young girl to be put in again. I never, ever want girls to be put in situations where they walk into their private spaces and they've been invaded by biological males. That's not right. There's a reason that we have made two separate bathrooms or locker rooms, and that needs to stay for safety reasons, and just for moral and ethical reasons as well. So, fast forward to my junior year of high school, when my dad had told me that I would be competing against a trans athlete in Nordic skiing. We had followed this athlete through cross country running and knew that he was a successful athlete in cross country running, um, in the girls' competition. Um, so then I didn't fully, I mean, I knew this athlete would probably be there, but I didn't fully believe, what, when my dad told me that this was the situation, this was the case. Um, and so when I showed up to my first meet, and sure enough, he was there competing in the girls category. I had lost to him numerous times throughout my junior year. And then we had made the Nordic main team together, which meant that we went to a competition in New Hampshire, and competed on a team together for the state of Maine. I have only ever beat him in one race, and it was at this main competition, meaning that the following race after I beat him, I started ahead of him. And probably the most defeating time that I lost to him was when I was climbing a hill and I saw a Maine uniform pass me and cross the finish line ahead of me. And I had instant defeat in that moment as I watched a biological male pass me and cross the finish line ahead of me. And that never should have been one of my goals. It never should have been something that I felt like I had to complete, because he's at a physical advantage over me. But I did have that goal essentially, and I didn't complete it that day, and I felt very defeated. And I went on to my senior year where I still had to compete against him. Um, so then, and I think a lot of people at times will say, why didn't you speak up at the time? But, under the Biden administration, I didn't think a lot was going to change. Um, and so when Trump had made the executive order and the state of Maine had said, we're not going to follow that, my dad had filed a civil rights complaint against my rights and had reached out to Representative Laurel Libby to let her know that we are in support of her and what she is doing. And that's when she had asked to speak with me and my father. And from there, that's how I got my opportunity in DC and how I've gotten lots of opportunities to speak.
Awesome. Well, what I can say is I've probably said this on here before with other people, but like I'm just very thankful that you're willing to speak. It's sad to me that you need to, but unfortunately, we live in a world where the adults can't figure this stuff out that little children know and understand. And so your voices, as much as like I remember I was telling you before we went on the show that at the Girl First rally, there were a lot of people talking about how the adults need to step up and protect kids. And the truth is, a lot of the adults there have been trying. They've been trying to do what they can,
Yeah,
but they
absolutely.
feel like there's no hope, and they're not being listened to ultimately, because there are other
Absolutely.
adults that are buying into this I don't know what gender cult, something along those lines,
Yeah.
and you know and so they're not listening to the adults, but they can't deny the stories that you girls are telling. They can go after Laurel Libby, and they're going after her hard, um but they're not, as far as have you received, that's one of the questions I have actually, because I've talked to some other people who have spoke out, and what have you received for backlash? Have you received a lot of backlash, or
I mean, honestly, no. I mean, obviously, you're always going to get those Facebook comments. I've had maybe a couple private messages, but not to the extent that I thought that I
yeah,
would. I've had an overwhelming amount of support, which I think just goes to show where our state is at, and where, you know, the leaders of our state are not following what we're saying and what we want. Because I've had so much support, even from people, we've had conversations in our house where it's like, wow, that person surprised me that they're saying something or that they're in support. But it's just one of those issues where it's not
right,
political. It's not an issue that's political. It's ethically wrong. It's morally wrong.
yeah.
And people know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's one thing to say, and I think there are a lot of people that are on this side of the aisle to say that like trans people should have rights and we should care for them and we should care about them and things like that. And
Mhm.
there are aspects of that that I'm like, I have some, but we should treat everybody with dignity and respect, essentially.
Right.
And that
Absolutely.
like we're in agreement on. But I think the problem is how they interpret that, right? And again, partly because of the
Right.
problem in the way in which I think people understand the trans movement, or understand what it means to be trans, is to say that if we tell this person that yes, you are the gender that you believe you are, but then we don't allow them to compete that way, then we're basically saying the opposite, and so that's
Right.
the challenge, I think, for a lot of these people who are ideologically captured. But at the same time, there is an element where I think they recognize when they hear stories like yours and be like, okay, but here I just can't, right? Like this is for even. And I think
Absolutely.
that's why you're right. This shouldn't be a political thing. It's not political to say what is obvious, but unfortunately, it's become that way. But
Yeah.
it's good. Like I was happy to hear, because when I had Julia on, I think I'd asked her the same question about like how people are treating you, and she was like, "Oh, everybody's." I haven't had really at that point. She hadn't had much in terms of negative reactions, which is really
Yeah.
good. Which is, again, that's one of the nice things, is that you guys are able to speak out and you're not getting significant negative backlash, whereas adults that
Right.
do are, which is unfortunate. So um you made a comment like in the past you didn't speak out. So why do you think, I think you kind of have alluded to this, but why do you think people are now willing to speak out and they weren't willing to speak out in the past?
I think it's all about a platform that you have, a space to share it. When I was in 7th grade, I didn't have the space. I didn't have, you know, the people to back me up. This wasn't I mean, at that point it was kind of
Hmm.
fresh, which I think even is where some of my administrators and the way that they handled it, they may not handle it the same way now. Because it was very fresh. It was very, they have their rights and we need to protect their rights. So we're not going to allow you to have the rights that you deserve because it was so new. People didn't know how to handle it. Now it's not as new. And now it's an issue that is no longer just happening, it's affecting people's lives, which I think is why a lot of people, have such a hard time with it because a lot of people, when it comes to people wanting to be transgender, a lot of people look at it as it's not affecting me, so it's not a big deal. But this is starting to affect people. This is starting to change people's paths in life. This is starting to take opportunities away, scholarships away. So I think when it comes to why I didn't speak out at the time, which I probably should have, and looking back, I should have probably made a bigger deal than I did, but I didn't have the platform to do it. I didn't have the proper space, and I'm a huge advocate for you're never going to win a fight on Facebook.
Right.
You're never going to win that battle on Facebook. So I didn't think that putting it out there, and bashing my school, which is the last thing that I wanted to do, was the right thing to do.
Right.
But now that I have the platform, and I know I have a voice, which is extremely important, and I hope that me speaking out, it allows younger girls that have stories or even don't and know that this is wrong. Like it is okay to speak out. It is okay to know you have a voice and to use that voice. And I know that now, but I think as a 13-year-old girl or even as a junior in high school, I didn't know that. And that was really hard.
Yeah, well, I think the environment was obviously very, very different back then. We're talking, this is 2020. Was it? Would it have been 2020 or? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My 7th grade year would have been
Yeah,
2020.
which is just first of all, it's kind of crazy because I think like I knew that there was some transgenderism going on, but it really wasn't until like late 2020, because as COVID came in, this like seeming like fad of the
Yeah.
gender cult really, I think, began, or at least not began, but like really accelerated. And so even
Yeah.
back 5 years
Totally.
ago, like this was an issue where you were having to deal with it, way up in Presque Isle, Maine, which just like that just is something
Yeah.
that surprises me, right? Like
Yeah, it surprises a lot of people.
California, yeah, but like Presque Isle, Maine, that just seems very surprising, especially at the time. But yeah, and like obviously as a seventh grader, like I would be very surprised to find seventh graders who are like, I'm going to go speak out because like you're
Right.
people take you more seriously, I think, when you're in high school, but when you're a teenage when you're in seventh grade, I think that's that's hard to believe.
Absolutely.
But it's something that I feel like I would say somebody should have said something about. And you are very generous and gracious with your administrators. I'm a little bit more like, I
Yeah.
get where you're coming from, but like they should be adults, right? They should recognize that.
Yeah.
And it actually, like, one of the things that this kind of relates to the conversation I had with Alan Sarvinas last night, again from Parental Rights and Education Maine. We were talking about how like these policies were actually put in place by school boards, and those school boards.
Yeah.
So the superintendents are, you're right. The administrators are under the authority of others, and they need to comply with rules that are put in place by the school board and a lot of those school boards are making those policies based on guidance from Drummond and Woodson, who is very much like a huge advocate for the gender cult.
Yeah.
I think that the superintendent, there is some type of grace that I think we can have with those people, but at the same time, if you're an adult, this is where they should have been speaking out. They should have been going to their school boards and being like, look, this happened, and this girl was like really uncomfortable, and obviously, right? And so it's unfortunate that the
Yeah.
adults didn't start speaking out sooner.
Right.
And I think we're very fortunate that this is one area where there's a lot of people in our country that are very negative on Trump, not in the conservative circles generally speaking, but they're very negative on Trump. But if Trump doesn't win, this doesn't happen, right? Right.
Right.
That's what kind of
Absolutely.
it should have, but would it have is the question.
Yeah.
Because like
Absolutely.
the not the Supreme Court, there was a court that struck down Biden's Title IX revisions that he had tried to do in 2024. I think in January, before Trump was inaugurated, they struck it down because
Yeah.
it was they said chilling speech. In other words, basically making people afraid to speak their mind, and so it was
Yeah.
basically violating their free speech in that way. But it was also compelled speech, right? And it was forcing people
Yeah.
to agree with things that they didn't agree with and say things that they don't
Absolutely.
believe. And so, like, it was going to get struck. It got struck down, but it's still. I mean, right now it got struck down, and Trump has issued an executive order, and there's so many
Yeah.
schools that are still abiding by the 2024 revision, which is unconstitutional, because
Yeah.
because the school boards have not decided to go back, and they're constantly citing the Maine Human Rights Act. Now, when do you know when the Maine Human Rights Act was? I don't expect you to be an expert in that, but I think that was. I think
Oh,
that
geez.
was right around maybe 2019 or 2020 when that one was passed. So that might have been
Yeah. I would say right around that time.
what was going on there. But either way, so what's it been like? So first of all, you went through this whole experience in your life, and now you talk to Laurel Libby, and you feel confident and you start
Yeah.
speaking up. What's it been like going from being a 3 varsity athlete to being like not a national, like one of the spokespeople for Maine, essentially, for the issue of protecting women's rights in sports while still being a high school student?
It's been a lot. I mean, from when I first spoke in Washington, D.C., that was the first quick turnaround. It was like, hey, Sunday morning, or no, it was like Sunday evening. They were like, listen, can you speak at an event on Thursday? I was like, yeah, I'll be there. So, I mean, that was my first quick turnaround, which I think taught me that this kind of world that, I've come into is all about quick turnarounds. Someone messages you at 5 and wants an interview at 5:30,
Yep.
So it's like it's one of those things, and it's also one of those things where it's like I have my school to be doing this year. And that's extremely important to me. But I also know that this is extremely important to me. So, getting these interviews in, and there are times when I'm tired and I'm like, oh, I really just don't want to I don't want to share my story again, because there are times that, you know, when you're fighting this, you feel like nobody's listening and you feel like you're getting nowheres. And so there are definitely times when I'm tired and I'm like, I don't think I want to do that again. But then I remember the younger girls in my life and the athletes that I've coached and the cousins that I have. And I'm like, you know what, Cassidy, this is worth it. That you don't know who will listen to that one interview. You don't know who will hear your story from that interview. You know, that's why I did CNN, because it's important that people hear my story that may not even agree with me, you know, so they can help make change happen as well. So it's been a lot, that's for sure. It's not been necessarily easy, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. Well, again, just like really appreciative of your willingness to step out and speak out.
Yeah,
Because like I said, we need voices like yours. And
absolutely.
you know, and it's also like it's dangerous and it's scary, but in a sense, like you guys are more,
Totally.
being that you're in school, people are less likely to come after you than the adults, especially the men. They don't like men to be able to speak, especially
No.
on this issue or many
No.
issues in our culture. But yeah, so tell me about this. So the first time you ever spoke about this was in Washington D.C.
In Washington, D.C., in front of AG Bondi. That was my first event that I spoke about my story, really. And, you know, I would not have wanted it to be any other way for my first event, because she was the most accepting and just wanting to hear our personal story that I could have asked for. Like, she was amazing. She spent time after just talking with us, and you know, I've said it multiple times, and I'll say it again. She just said the words like, "You will not fight this alone anymore," and those words were just so powerful to hear from, you know, a woman in our government. And because right now I don't have the best um, person above me. Janet Mills is not really showing me what it feels like to have women backing you up. But to hear AG Bondi say that was just amazing.
Yeah, so that must have been really surreal to meet our new attorney general in person. That to me,
Yeah.
like, so you were just with her. It wasn't, or was this in front of a group of people that she was one of the people who was there?
Yeah, so it was her, and then there were 21 other state attorney
Wow.
generals that attended.
So you're pretty connected now.
Yeah, yeah, I spoke with a lot of them. A lot of the attorney generals were like, if you need anything at all, you know, they gave us their business cards and said, if you need anything at all, give us a call. You know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. Um, and just, you know, but it wowed me because there were five of us that spoke there. And the five of us that were there, none of our state attorney generals were there. And we were from different states.
Wow.
So that just kind of goes to show what we're living in right
Right. Well,
now.
yeah, you've got, unfortunately, our country's very divided, and you're either, it's
Yeah.
either all or nothing. Because, like, you know, again, despite the fact that this is an 80-20 issue, even here in the state of Maine, you go to school board meetings, you go to these places, it doesn't feel that way. And people
Yeah.
here are so, like, all they see in this battle between Janet Mills and Donald Trump is a man trying. Interesting. It's very fascinating because they see a man trying to tell a woman what to do. They somehow miss
Right.
that when we come here to the state of Maine, and Ryan Fecteau has twice over now censured Laurel Libby. He's a man telling a woman that she can't speak, which is just,
It feels like we've gone back years and years and years.
yeah, it's pretty wild. But so part of this is about, you know, I think you talked a little bit about earlier about like this, the issue of you know, feeling like hopeless. Well, you actually, I give you some credit, you didn't just feel hopeless that you could never win. Your goal was, I'm still going to beat this boy, even though I know I still want to beat him. And you worked hard, and unfortunately, you know, you weren't able to prevail against him. But this is more than about sports, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is way more than about sports.
Yeah, so like, because to me, I feel like most of the conversation recently, and Girl First and all this other kind of stuff, has been focused on, you know, the sports angle. which I think is an important angle, and I think it's where we have much more broad-based support than some of the other aspects of this. But the other issue that doesn't seem to be being talked about as much is about protecting women's spaces, like being
Yeah.
able to, like, because like that's the thing that just, like, I mean, okay, look, there's a degree, I'm going to say this out loud and hopefully people don't judge me, there's a degree to which people are either more athletically or less athletically gifted. Like, I was never, despite
Yeah.
being a man, I was never going to play in the NBA. I probably, if I decided to transition, couldn't play in the WNBA, right? There's a reality of the fact that people are limited based on their own genetics and this, that, and the other thing. Now, the reason we
Yeah.
have girls and boys sports and they're not joined together is because we've looked at, okay, in order to create fairness so that there's any opportunity for girls to be able to compete, because they're just not going to, if we just have boy sports, we know the stats, we know that these are
Yeah.
rough numbers because I don't remember the exact statistic, but I think it was somewhere around a couple 100,000 girls participated in sports prior to Title IX, a couple million
Yeah.
after Title IX, right? In terms of, on an
Right.
annual basis. And so obviously it's getting more girls involved in sports. And then if we just cede that to biological men who decide that they either they actually have gender dysphoria, or, spoiler alert, I do think some people would fake that in order to
Oh yeah.
win, because guess what? Athletes cheat. If you need any examples, see Barry Bonds, see Roger Clemens, see so many other so many of these like steroid using professional athletes that get in trouble for that at the Olympics and things like that. People
Absolutely.
will cheat in order to be able to win. If you don't believe that, then
Right.
you're just choosing to walk around with your eyes closed. But like, even if that wasn't the case, like this is, again, so sports is an issue, but it's more than about sports. And I think they're not
Oh
talking
yeah.
enough about the spaces, which is where I feel like your story of like being forced to change, because like I think that, again, that isn't being highlighted as much. The fact that you had to change, like,
Right.
in front of a boy, and like, why do you think people are not we're not talking about this as much? What do you think's going on?
I think right now sports is a big thing. And I think, I've seen the comments on Facebook where people are like, if you go in a locker room, who's looking at each other? Why does it matter anyways? But this is our safe space.
Mm,
When I change in a locker room or when I go into a bathroom, that's a safe space. That's a space that, you know, is meant to be private. And right now it's not private. If we just allow everybody to be in one locker room, we might as well just create one locker room. But there was a reason in the first place that we created two different locker rooms, and that was to protect people. And that's just people don't understand that. And I think that part of the reason that people aren't necessarily speaking, out about this is because they don't know how to go about that. How do you in your mind, they know you have to know it's not right. You have to know putting a biological male in a female space is not right, but I don't think people want to fully admit that, which is why I think people aren't necessarily talking about it. Um, and I don't think a lot of people are willing to share their story like I am. I think there's probably so many more stories out there like mine, but I don't think people are necessarily willing to share them because it's hard to share that kind of story isn't easy. It took me, I didn't share that story at the White House. I didn't share that story um, in any of my first few interviews. The first time that I actually really shared that story was the couple weekends ago at the Girls First rally. That was the first time that I'd really shared that piece of my
mm,
story, and I think part of that is because it's hard. And I do appreciate my administration, and I didn't want to put them in a place of feeling like it was their fault because there's a policy above them. But at some point, that is my story, and at some point, I have to protect the younger girls, and I have to share that piece of my story to hopefully make that happen.
yeah. So speaking of the fact that you think that there are other people out there, which, again, thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think it really does alert more people to the fact that this is bigger than just being about sports. This is about protecting women's
Yeah.
privacy. And as we learned today, right? Or I mean, I think I learned yesterday or the day before, but there's a story that's come out of Bonnie Eagle High School where there's a boy who went into a bathroom with a girl and raped this girl. And one of the worst things about it is that like it's from what I'm reading in the articles, it doesn't look like the parents were alerted, and the administration in that situation, not your school, not your administration, didn't alert the parents. And we don't even 100% know for sure that where it happened, because the school is
Yeah.
still not releasing information. They're saying that they have to, for privacy and this, that, and the other thing. But part of this guy being released on bail, I guess, is that he's not allowed to go near that school. And we do know that there's a victim, 15-year-old girl who is raped. We do this is part of the reason why this is important, is that young
Right.
men do bad things, and if they're given an opportunity
Absolutely.
to enter into under the guise of whatever they have to, they will enter
Right.
into girls' spaces. And this is why it's so important. We have Erica Lynn watching the show is saying, "Preach it, girl." That's why she went from the traditional sports to racing cars, because she's less than 5 feet tall, I guess, 4'11" at 34. And anyway, we got to protect girls, and it's sad for all the people who've had to deal with that. Thanks, Erica. I do agree. Yeah. So one of the things, like, so since you've started speaking out, have you had other girls like reach out to you, other younger girls who maybe have experienced similar things, or
I haven't had I mean, if anything, I've had more girls reach out about the
right.
sports. I haven't had a lot of girls reach out about my locker room situation. And again, I think part of that is it's a lot easier to say that you raced openly against a biological male than to say that you had to change in front of a biological male. I mean, I know girls even at my school at the time, some that chose to stay in the locker room and some that went and changed in the individual bathrooms. And so, but none of them are really talking about it. And I don't know why exactly that is that people won't share. I mean, I understand it's very hard to share that
Yeah.
piece of your story. Um, so I understand that piece of it. But I don't exactly know why even talking like to people is so hard about it. But I understand that to share a story like that is extremely hard.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, like it's a yeah. There's I think there are a lot of elements of why somebody would be not want to share about that. Like anytime something like I did training years ago to be part of a hotline for rape crisis counseling,
Mm,
and like I think that there's a sense of you feel really hopeless, and you feel like you're not in control when you go through the situations like
absolutely.
this. And this is like, this type of situation is not rape, right? But it's in that same direction
Right.
where some of your safety, some of your power, some of your control over your own life has been taken away from you, and people are really
Absolutely.
uncomfortable. um are really uncomfortable, like sharing areas where they feel insecure, right? Because it's
Right.
scary, it's uncomfortable. So to me, like, it makes a lot of sense why people would be unwilling to do it. But that's also why this is such an important part of the conversation, because
Right.
how many girls are feeling this way, and are scared, and also are afraid to say anything about it, are afraid that they might be called a bigot
Yeah.
if they even acknowledge it out loud. Maybe that's part of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
saying that, because if you and there's a lot of pressure to accept the things that the gender cult is teaching.
Right.
That's what I've decided to call it today, I guess, is the gender cult. But like, there's a lot of like, nobody wants to be called a bigot. Everybody wants to be seen as being a nice, good person for the most part, whether they're good or not. They want to be seen that way. And so I think that's part of it. But that's why I'm just like hammering on this today, because I think it's so important to recognize this is bigger than just about girls sports, and we're actually putting
Absolutely.
girls at risk
Yeah.
of some of these people doing nefarious things. And we
Yeah.
know from reports around the school, the state, there were some situations where there were boys that were peeping on girls and different things like that. And so we know teenage boys are not to be trusted. Like I think I said a couple,
Absolutely.
one of the other podcasts is like teenage boys are typically thinking about one thing.
Right.
You know, and like they've got their hormones and they're in full gear and they're just that's what they're thinking about for the
Absolutely.
most part. No offense to teenage boys, but I was one at one point, and I didn't do any of that stuff. But you know, I know that a lot of kids did some bad things
Yeah,
during
absolutely.
those ages. So so thank you for speaking out about that. And for anybody else out there, do you have any like words for if there are any young girls who end up seeing this and are wondering, do you have anything to share with them?
You know, I would just say that whether you have the story to share or not, it's important to speak out about your opinion because that's how change happens, and we need to share our stories, and we need to allow people to know that we have voices and our voices need to be heard. And if you are on the brim of thinking one way or the other, you know, think of all the women in your life, and if you can genuinely look at them and say, I don't want to fight for you, and I'm willing to have your private areas taken away and your opportunities taken away and your equality in a sense taken away, then that's really sad, and you should really reconsider, you know, everything that women have fought for so long.
Yeah, no, that's really sad. I agree. Yeah. So, well, my brain clicked off for a moment. I did have another thought, and it's drifting away. Um, yeah. Well, again, yeah. Just thank you for speaking. Oh, yeah. This is what I was gonna shift. So you're a senior now, right? So
Yes.
what's next, and when are you going to start your career in politics?
So I'm actually, my plan right now is not politics. My plan is I'm planning to go to Liberty University in Virginia next year to study bio pre-med to hopefully become a PA. But I have kind of a fast track because I've got a lot of dual enrollment college credits from high school. So I've only got 2 years of my undergraduate and then 2 years of PA school.
Holy.
Um, but I do hope to come back to my area and get involved in maybe my local government if I can. And you know, I one of my biggest dreams is to have a family and to be a mom. Um, but I obviously want to help to create a space and an environment where that is possible and a good place to raise kids, which is one reason that I speak up is because you know I hope that if I have daughters someday, they don't have to deal with stuff like this. And so maybe get into my local government. But right now, my plan is not politics. But I've had a lot of people recently tell me that that should be part of my plan.
Well, I mean, you're willing to speak up. You have a voice. You speak truth in a time where people are afraid to speak. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have here in the state of Maine, and the reason that this has gone on as long as it did is because the people were too afraid to speak up. And I
Absolutely.
read a book in like 2021, 2022, maybe about the French underground during World War II, and like you know, after France had lost to Germany, right? They had kind of
Yeah.
you know, made peace essentially and allowed themselves to be ruled by the Germans, and Britain was getting ready to try and you know, convince the Americans to join the fight. And during this time, you had the French underground. And who do you think ran the French underground? Well, that's, you don't have to answer, but it was the youth, like parents. The parents of these children were afraid to do anything for fear of what might happen to
Yeah.
them and their kids, and you can understand why. You know, parents in this,
Yeah.
and we're in a kind of a similar environment where like there's a lot of
Yeah.
social pressures. Now, parents aren't afraid that somebody's going to come and kill them and their kids if they speak out, but they are afraid that they might lose their job, or if they're a business owner, that they might lose
Right.
their clients, right? And then therefore not be able
Absolutely.
to provide for and take care of their kids. And so this is where, you know, teenagers, if you're out there, we need you to speak up. We need you to tell us what's
Absolutely.
happening, because when you do, then we can use that information to go and fight for you. Without that, it's
Absolutely.
harder to fight for you. Unfortunately, you have to be a part of the process. And again, it's like I wish that quote unquote the adults in the room could have a little less insanity, and understand what like 2 + 2 = 4, not 5, as I like to say. It's not my thing. It's actually from the book 1984. But either way, it's a reality. So
Yeah,
so it's we need more people to speak up, is the short version. But yeah,
absolutely.
but obviously a PA, that's a good, going into the medical field. What
Yeah.
about the fact that the medical field is pushing this stuff? How are you going to? How do you think you'll handle that? Or you don't have to get into that if you don't want to.
I
I don't know if you're prepared for that
no,
question.
I love the questions like that. I think it kind of goes along with having a family and that kind of thing, like what I want my future to look like, which is why I finally realized that I have a voice and that I need to use my voice, because I want to continue to be able to live in a world that I want to be in,
Mm.
and then I don't have to fight for everything. And so I do want to go into the medical field, although I have a mother in the medical field who some days comes home and says it's great, and some days comes home and says this is not what you should do. But um, I think it's one of those things that's always been a passion. My plan hopefully is to go into the mission field and help serve under served communities, and hopefully go overseas and help over there. So it's always been a passion of mine, but some people say it's not. Don't do it, and I definitely think that things are being pushed, but I think there's also a point where I know to stand my ground, and if I have to not work in that kind of environment, then I will have to say this is not the position for me, and this is not where God wants me. But I'm a firm believer in that God has a plan, and if I'm meant to be in a certain area, he'll make sure that I'm there.
That's awesome. So your faith is very important to you. It sounds like it's coming out.
Very important to me. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm a Christian. I'm very I love that. And
Awesome.
I think like that again, some of the challenges doesn't mean I like I like what you're saying, because I think a lot of people are like, when it comes to education, it's like, let's pull our kids out of the school, and I understand that. Like my wife, I think
Right.
wrong hand, my wife right there. When she gets
Yep.
over here, she's currently in Kenya, unfortunately, because we're going through the legal immigration process, and our
Okay.
current plan is to homeschool. It doesn't mean I want to abandon the public education system, but I don't
Yeah.
trust it right now. But the answer
Absolutely.
isn't to give up and back down. The answer is to like press in. And so like I do think we need people who have a good head on their shoulders to go into the medical field and not give in to the pressures that is really driven by the pharmaceutical industry. Like you ask yourself,
Absolutely.
what's interesting is the Democrat Party. Again, this shouldn't be political. So much of what's political today shouldn't be political. But when you look at like what the Democratic Party used to stand for, if you turn back the clock 20 years, 15 years, was they were very anti-big business, in favor of small business. And
Right.
they were fond of saying things like follow the money, right? And now, like when we talk about the transgender cult, like the question is like, why are the pharmaceutical companies pushing this? Have we just somehow turned our brains off, and do we believe that they actually care about people, and that's why they're pushing this stuff?
Right.
Like where is this coming from? Who is influencing all of these doctors to push this ideology?
Right.
And to me, it's primarily the pharmaceutical companies who largely pay
Absolutely.
for and fund the medical educations.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah. And like I think that's extremely important, and I think that's one reason that I would continue into the medical field, is that I don't think it's going to change unless we get people like me in there, to say that's not right. And I think obviously, like I said, there comes a point where I may have to step away and to be, but I hope to make a change in what I'm doing wherever I'm at.
well, awesome. Well, I think it takes a lot of courage, but I really like the fact that you know what you're getting into, and you're going to head into it anyway, and trust that
Yeah,
if this is where the Lord is leading you, He'll take care of you on the path. So,
absolutely.
um, so cool. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah,
I know
for
we got
having
to
me.
get going pretty soon. So if you have any like last thing that you want to say, we can go ahead and do that now.
I think if I just had to leave people with one thing is, I mean, obviously we just had the conversation about being a Christian, and I think one of the things that has stumped me most in an interview is that if I had the opportunity to speak to a transgender athlete, what would I say to them? And I hope that I can leave this with everybody that's listening, is that I love that person the same that I would love any other person. And it is not a personal issue. It is strictly about me wanting a fair and equal and safe space for women to continue to have for generations. And it's not that person that I have an issue with, and it's not that I don't love them, but I need to support having that equal space.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's been emphasized here and there as we've kind of done our rallies, but like this is very few people. There are some, but very few people have a specific problem with the athlete that kind
Right.
of led to this happening. It's more the parents, the administration, the MPA, the state of Maine, and all of these adults that are in the room that are not encouraging people to do the right
Absolutely.
thing. And yeah, I think we need to have compassion on people who are struggling and are in a difficult place, because I can't imagine right now is easy for that young man. Well, so cool. Well, thank you. So for those of you watching at home, how can you get involved? How can you help stop things like this from happening? You can get involved in your school boards. You can find, if most towns, we're trying to establish in all towns, Republican city committees to try and help get Republicans elected to school boards, city council, state house, state senate, all these different places. If you're looking for ways to get involved, you can look at like your county committee website. If you can't find one or can't find a city committee, feel free to reach out to me. I'm the chair of the Cumberland County Republicans. You can reach out to me and I can try to get you connected locally. Pay attention to what Pine Tree Patriots on X is doing with sharing a ton of information. They've got a website now, and they're trying to help get as much information out to people so they can know how to get involved, where to get involved, what types of events are coming up. This Saturday, there's a training for people who want to try to help get Title IX reversed in school boards. So there's an opportunity there. So if you look, Christina Parker, who runs Turning Point USA, you can find them on Facebook. I know it's Turning Point USA at Kennebec County, I think is the name. So, and there's information about their event that's coming up this Saturday to train people from like 11 to 3, I think, with lunch on how to try to get this addressed in our schools. Because part of the reason this goes on is the school boards are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not protecting our girls. We need to put pressure on them and get them to protect their girls. And the reality is, even in some more liberal school districts, we've been able to put that kind of pressure on and get schools to change their policies. So it is possible, but it takes parents like you and people like you standing up, speaking out, and trying to protect our girls. So I would just really encourage you to do that. Also, new to the Muddy Waters podcast is I've developed a little bit of merchandise. If you're interested in so like sweatshirts, coffee cups, stuff like that, you can look on my page a little ways down, and you can buy some of the merchandise if that's something you're interested in, stickers and things like that, to help support the podcast. I do this, I don't make money doing this so far. It's cost money quite a bit. So if you want to support in any way, that's the best way to do that. So, but also, most importantly, like, follow, share, subscribe, all those different types of things, because the reason we do this podcast, again, is to get information out to the people of Maine. I can't do it alone. I need your help. So there are going to be shorts from this video, from others, you going on to all the different places, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and on X are places where you can share information from. But as you engage in civil discourse, build relationships with people who are not part of the party, don't see things the way that we do, you can use the information that we're creating through these stories to help people better understand what's really going on when they're like, is that really happening? And be like, oh no, there is. Here's the story, and send the link. So this is how we take back our state, because we don't control the media like the left does, but we're trying to fight in this information war with the podcast and with a number of other different things like what the Maine Wire is doing. So join in that way. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back on. I think tomorrow I've got one of the representatives from the House. I should remember his name, but I don't have it right in front of me. But we'll have him on to talk about what it was like going from being a member of the Green Party to somehow being a member of the Republican Party. What is going on in this upside down world? It should be a fun conversation. So we'll see you back here tomorrow, and have a great day. Thanks again, Cassidy.
Yeah, thank you.